Here we go. Hello, everybody. I'm Sarah V. Cruz, and this is this week's CS Stories. I am so excited to have you guys here today. We're trying a little bit of a different approach to avoid some technical issues that we had last week, to maybe avoid some flops and notches in our own belt, dare I say. So with me today, I have Jaime from Proper Manufacturing Co. But listen, don't limit her just to that, okay? Jaime is a phenomenal female. If you're not trending that hashtag, let's do it now, guys. All right, let's put the CSSNerd into action. And she works a lot with the Women's Network, not to mention working in a way to help people define their own professional goals, what their ambitions are. And she uses her bachelor's in, listen, I'm not even going to shortchange her. She's going to let you guys know exactly how amazing she is. And I'm so excited. So let's educate, motivate, and put a little fun into professional development. Jaime, thank you so much for coming on tonight. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. I'm excited to be here and share my story.
Yay! And thank you again for talking with me on this malleable platform and really just pivoting around all the awesome ways to, just move around, right? Talk about developing with the industry. Am I right?
Absolutely. I mean, life is all about making quick fixes, and that's what this program's about. So
yes, it's perfect. I'm really excited. So Jaime, the audience needs to know, what was your biggest or most memorable professional flop?
So I like that you said the biggest or most memorable, because what I want to talk about today is definitely the most impactful and most meaningful kind of professional flop that I have had. And it really takes me back to the very beginning of my career, and that is having professional tunnel vision. By that, I mean setting my eyes on a very, very specific goal and not keeping an open mind to what else could have been available to me until like a massive turning point.
And that's interesting because I know your background is in research and cell and molecular biology. So I gotta hear the segue. I gotta hear it.
Yeah, so in college, I studied biology, ultimately focusing on cell and molecular biology. I did some research in an HPV lab. And for me, I knew right away, like wet lab, basic lab research was not the right fit. But I had my entire life planned to go to medical school since I was a little kid. I had been diagnosed with a relatively benign medical thing when I was a kid. I was around doctors a lot. I just figured that was a place for me. And this was something I held on to aggressively through college. So yeah, it was just a full tunnel. So I graduated college and I had taken the MCAT once, but wasn't that happy with my score. So I decided to do what all other pre-meds do in that situation, which is work in clinical research.
Okay.
And so I had an amazing experience working for a phenomenal lab. I had the opportunity to work with amazing doctors and get a lot of exposure to what the day-to-day really was of being a surgeon, of being a doctor in general. And over that time, I started to allow myself to wonder, what if I didn't do this anymore?
What did that feel like? And you talked about the tunnel vision. So just for the sense of it sounded like you were starting to bounce around the walls of your own professional restrictions on yourself. So what were some of those feelings that you were like, oh my God, everything I planned for is not going to come to fruition?
Yeah, by this time I had graduated college. I had taken the MCAT once. I had started working in clinical research. I was already starting to make plans to retake the MCAT at that point. It was horrifying. It really felt like if I let that go, I had wasted all these years prior. And then I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was a doctor about applying and about going through the medical school and residency experience. And she said something that I will never forget, which is that in going to medical school, you have to start out like all the way up here. You can't be like realistically knowing what it's like to go through that process because they're gonna chip you down, right? It's a hard, long process. And that was the first time that I ever considered happiness as a goal, like personal fulfillment more than getting these letters after my name. And it felt like my whole identity was pre-med. I mean, I remember like just you're on dating profiles, you meet new friends in a new, in a new city. And it's like the identity was Jaime Terran pre-med. There was such tunnel vision to that point that it was like the idea of letting go of that dream was like letting go of myself.
I think that really resonates, and kudos to the real life advice that your professor gave you. Talk about an honest assessment. It's like, listen, you got to be your biggest fan, because if you're not feeling the weight of your own hand on your back, nobody's going to put you there. And I love the transparency that you said, that you not only took your MCAT once, you were clearly taking it a second time. So we all know what that means, right?
Yeah, of course.
And I love that you were even transparent with chasing abbreviations after your name, because I feel like that really represents itself in our industry. As we start to weigh the validity of certifications and why they're important, we often find ourselves discussing what that really represents to being a sterile processing technician. So listen, you guys, some big takeaways there. Hard stops for professional development, honest assessment seen throughout, and really just that realization that it sounds like you wanted to put yourself first in your professional ambitions for the first time.
Yeah, I wanted to put myself before my professional ambitions. And that's not to say that I don't have massive professional goals and that I don't love having a career and that that's not still important to me. It just wasn't the only thing that mattered all of a sudden.
I love that. I love that. So how did you turn this into the silver lining? So now you're like ready to drop a big old bomb on all your plans that you've ever had, and the light at the end of the tunnel is being completely caved in. Then what?
And that's exactly what it was like. It was like all of a sudden this super clear path forward, because what it seemed and what I think it feels like for a lot of people when they're on this type of career path is, well, I'll get my certification and I'll have my career for the rest of my life. No matter what I think we see it with sterile processing technicians, we see it with nursing. You think, okay, I'll get my cert and then that's it. We move forward. Sorry, I think the sun just moved a little bit for me. So
it's okay. This is the cloud coming over. It's the silver lining. It's going to come back.
Exactly. So at that point, I was working in the same lab, and I had been working there for years. And I had just recently been talking to them about my plans to take time off to study. And all of a sudden, I was like, no, we're not doing that anymore. No. And of course, everyone thought I was crazy. They thought I was anxious. They thought I was, just making a quick decision. And it was a super quick decision, because it felt like if I didn't just cut it off, there would be no turning back, which I think is maybe my personality more than is necessary for most people. But immediately everyone wanted to know what's next. What am I going to do next? What am I going to do if I don't go to medical school?
Because that's exactly what I was going to ask, because you said, you were so quick. You're like, listen, that's my personality. When I know, I know. And I think that's great. I think a lot of the times, especially in sterile processing, and especially in my own experience with imposter syndrome, we play down a lot of our gut reactions or our internal thoughts because we have these preconceived notions of what things are supposed to be. And I think the quick check that you give yourself. So were you able to come up with actionable steps that quickly as well? So did you?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. My plan at that point was find a job that paid me better than the job I had. And at that point I was in New York City. I'm back in New York City. I love living in New York City now. But at that point, I felt like I needed to also relocate my life. I not only was going to change, I was going to dump everything out of the bag and start over again.
Good.
And so frankly, that took me on a wild journey. I lived in DC for a little while. I lived in San Francisco for a little while. It took me to starting my career in the medical device industry. But it also took me through so many different challenges and so many different scary moments where I had no idea what my future would be, which made me finally sit down and ask myself, maybe what do I want it to be?
Wait, can we just sit in that for a second? Maybe it's what I want it to be. That hits, Jaime. That serves just that moment of pause for your own honest assessment and self-realization. This must be when you were able to turn it into professional gold. Oh, it looks like we have a little bit of a lag. Hang on a second.
Sarah, did I lose you?
I hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, you're back now.
Perfect. It sounds like in that pause moment there, that's where you're starting to turn it into professional gold. So now we're out of the flop, the silver linings there, and now you're okay. Keep me going, because now this is great.
Yeah. So I think at this point, I'm still flailing a little. I think the flop is over. We're just sort of flailing a little. I'm starting to realize that maybe I didn't need to run away from the city that I was in. I had a job that was very stable. I was getting a lot of great experience at, but I knew it also wasn't the right fit for me. And fortunately, they gave me the opportunity, my first opportunity to work in education. And once I started working in education, I realized that what I loved about the idea of being a doctor was helping people, but I didn't necessarily want that weight of responsibility and that often associated time commitment. That was just something I felt as though I didn't want to give up my whole life for my profession, but I knew I wanted to be in a position of working with people, of helping them get better. And that was still very much part of my identity. So now I realize I don't necessarily need those particular letters to fulfill that part of my identity. I need a pathway that can give me that experience.
Yes, and I like how you said pathway. It's like you were at the gate, but the only way to make it was to actually walk down it. And you've never gone down it before, so there was no path. So just the realization that there was not necessarily a right or a wrong way to go about this, because you were literally about to forge your own professional endeavors, which I think it's interesting that you mentioned that it wasn't the right fit for you. So which part of the teaching people in your next phase, what did you do to find that right fit in your next phase? What route did you go?
Yeah, so the first position I had was straight sales. Outside sales, very traditional, dialing, literally knocking on doors. I never had the love of the chase, which I think is something you need for sales. And what I've learned over, the years since this has happened, I mean, this is like a 10-year story being smushed into half an hour.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
What I've learned over that time is that there are certain points where you just know you're in the wrong spot. Even if you don't know what the right thing to do next is, you just know you're in the wrong spot. And
interesting.
What
aside from like a gut feeling, is there any way, I know I'm really reaching at the air now, but is there any way you can maybe qualitate that or quantitate that? Just how did you know it wasn't the right fit? What was happening around you that may have been a good actionable step or physical indicator for some of our, CSS nerds out there that may be feeling the same way?
So I think if you look around, if I can really simplify it, if you look around at the things that you're doing each day and the goals that you have for your job, And there are people who are enjoying the experience for those things, for what you do every day, for what your goals are each day. But you are frustrated by those simple things,
Okay.
then perhaps you're in the wrong spot. So if you take my sales example, the goal was to find a new surgeon to purchase the product.
Okay.
And if you can't make that in any way pleasant, like if you're not enjoying the journey and you're not enjoying the win of the sale, maybe that's not the right spot. Maybe more simply put, for the CSS folks, you're showing up to work every day and you're starting to feel as though the things you used to enjoy about your job just don't give you a spark anymore. And it's not that it's hard work, and it's not that you're just tired of it or you maybe need a vacation. It's that you don't get quite the joy out of what once did bring you joy, or what is meant to bring you joy, or maybe brings other people joy about the job.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good reflection point.
Yeah, and I think, that really serves, Jaime, because it's true. If you use, let's pick decon. Not everybody likes decon, right? But if you can't even get through it in the first 5 minutes, and then you're finally out of decon, but you're feeling the same way when you have to answer the phone, or every set on assembly feels like it's so overwhelming and daunting, dare I say. I think those are some really great physical indicators. So then, like, after you realize that actionable step about yourself and you didn't have the drive in sales, what came next?
So I think that in some ways I was very lucky because I was able to voice my situation, and because I had a unique background to getting that sales role, I was able to pivot a bit into an education role. And honestly, in my story, I think there's a bit of luck that went with that. However, I think that the thing to do at that moment is to ask, what would be better? What would be more fulfilling? Who do I see around me that is experiencing something that seems like would be more fulfilling? And in some ways, that is what happened for me. I had developed a strong relationship with the educator at the company.
Oh, good.
But I will say, like, sometimes stuff just presents itself, and then you have to be brave enough to take the chance too.
Yes, and if we could pause there, that's Jaime. Listen, you guys, Jaime is dropping lightning bolts here. Literally, it's thunderstorming outside, and like lightning bolts are happening. It's putting yourself in a position to make those moves, even though you may be scared to take them. And I like how you say luck, and I see it as very much as just doing what came next for you that put you in the position to receive that luck. It's like if you have a job that you've always wanted, or a career that you've always wanted, don't wait to move on the career because a position opened. What were you doing in the meantime to help you get there? Were you looking at your resume? And that you weren't experiencing that urge for the chase. So part of you was looking for something different. And that's
absolutely,
that's great.
I totally agree with you that if you can't really sit back and wait for that lucky moment. You do have to build relationships. You have to test the waters, and mostly you have to reflect for yourself. Because I had to know I was not in the right situation in order to make that decision to change to something new. And I think that a lot of people get comfortable in their discomfort. They get comfortable in feeling unhappy. All you have to do is look at any sterile processing professional Facebook group, forum, to see that there's a lot of people who just don't love their jobs, and they're just gonna
burn out, stagnant, frustrated, tired of waiting for the next opportunity. Jaime, and that is a great detail. And being that you moved into education, and I am quite the fancy for an educator myself, I am very excited to hear that you were able to find that calling, almost like you transitioned from a job mentality into a career mindset when you settled into the proper education and marketing format. So what was it like being in that, not I want to say settled, but what's it like being in your calling? What's it feel like to sit in your passion?
Yeah, so I want to add one step to it, because I don't want to make it seem like it was like so like, oh, I just realized I was in the right place, because that was totally not at all what happened, right? So this is at a previous job. I was doing sales. They offered me an education role. That education role was actually coordinating other people's educations. So I was working for other people's educating like courses and stuff. So I was working with other people to schedule and make sure people were attending and things like that. But I wasn't delivering education very much at that point.
Okay.
Ultimately, that was a small company. It was just the right time for me to move on, which is when I ended up at Proper. And at Proper, my position was originally mostly in marketing. And my title still there is marketing. Now it's marketing and education. And I think that that's a really critical thing to point out, that sometimes you don't make the change to where exactly you want to be. Sometimes the change comes over time, and you kind of have to guide it towards that direction. So for me, I was starting out, I've been with Prover for 5 years. On the side, I have been starting to do some consulting stuff for supporting people through their career changes, just using my experience. And when I got to Proper in marketing, we had an amazing team. I was really fortunate to be in a place that was open to supporting the needs of the industry and also the needs of all of our employees. And so I saw an opportunity to start delivering educational content through what is now Proper Academy. And in doing that, I've just been able to continue learning a ton, to continue, marketing products, doing the basic things we think of with a marketing job title. But also I've had the opportunity to see and make I've had the opportunity to make opportunities for things that may or may not be interesting to me. So in creating Proper Academy, I kind of just put my hand up and said, I want to do education. And it was super, super fortunate to have the support of my company and for there to be need in the industry. And I'm sure, Sarah, you can relate to this, where you're just like, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And through that, I've had some really great opportunities that have helped me explore more and more what it is I want for my career, and what I've ultimately begun to call like the vision, like my professional vision more than the goals. To me, the vision is the long term. What do I want my days to feel like? What kind of impact am I having on the world around me? And the goals are sort of the steps to get there. Like, what are the little things I can do in the next year, 2 years, 5 years? Is it getting a certificate? Is it getting a degree? Or do those things not matter at all? And it's actually about meeting Sarah Cruz and knowing that we can have, this relationship that will work together on something really amazing.
Yeah, and I think that really hits, because I like to tell a lot of the viewers and a lot of the CSS nerds out there that visions without goals are just wishes. Okay, the only way to achieve our professional vision is to create that foundation. And a lot of the times, our professional foundation is our biggest flop. It's that mountain that we have literally broken down and now we're standing on, to create objective driven goals that feed our vision. If we can't articulate what we want, we can't create pathways to get there. And if our immediate comfort zone isn't serving our end goals, and we have all those great physical indicators that you very well articulated to us, then it's time to get a little uncomfortable outside of it. I don't know who said it, but there is a hazard to being comfortable all the time, and
Absolutely. And
Not
I
to
think
sound like a
that
bunch of analogies here, but listen, this is what it's about as we round the corner of this half hour. It goes by quick, you know, so.
it does go by really quick. And the one thing I would say, you know, if somebody's watching this and they're saying, okay, I recognize I'm uncomfortable, I recognize something needs to change, but I work in sterile processing. There's me, my 50 colleagues, and one manager. You know, where do I have to go from here? And that I would encourage them to, again, think about that vision, think about what they want their days to look at, and try to let go of some of that tunnel vision that says, well, in this department, there's one manager. So that person is going to be the manager for the next 20 years. I have no opportunities, right? We can feel very, very shut down, like, you know, the tunnel's caving in. And to think about all the skills that you've gathered over your time and what else is there? How else can you use those skills to reach that vision and not get stuck in tunnel vision?
I think that is awesome. But, you know, I feel like we should just call the name of this episode, I think Jamie's awesome, because I probably said it like 8 times.
Well, thank
No,
you.
but I really appreciate the realness you brought to this situation too. And even when I was ready to be like, oh my God, now Jamie's going to have her blossom moment, Jamie's like, no, wait a minute, because there was even a littler flop on top of that flop that led me here.
Yeah.
So, and I think it also is important to point out that you haven't reached it yet. You're still developing, and it's almost like you find your why and find a way to resonate in that instead of bouncing off the walls inside of a tunnel that we've predetermined for ourselves. I mean, and I want to ask you what your personal take on this statement is. How do you feel about changing our professional presentation from where we once were to where we want to be? What do you think of when I ask that?
I think the thing that most stands out to me is that when you are deciding what you want to do for a job or what you think your career will be, especially when we're young, right? If you went to college or a technical program, or perhaps you just finished high school and jumped into a career field, you think you're deciding something forever, which is why it feels like you're making this big transformation when you change your professional identity. But I think that a lot of that comes from the idea that, okay, you're in kindergarten, then you're in first grade, then you're in, you know, second, and then you're a high schooler, and then that's it. Then you have your whole entire life, and we want to put a bucket, we want to put a title, because that seems easy and manageable and comfortable. And so for me, it makes me remember, it makes me think of the idea that there is no end to your professional development. There is no final checkbox or, you know, singular purpose. Even for the people who go to medical school and they become, you know, whatever super specialists they are, there are tons of ways that they can change their careers down the road. Or many people kind of add stuff to their career. They work with a company and develop a product, or they do education, or they, you know, create Instagram. I mean, there's so many things. Like, the world is a wild place, and in another 10 years we'll have all new ways that you can transform. And so in a similar way that you know, my husband and I agreed when we were getting married that we weren't going to say their wedding was going to be the best day of our lives, because there should be so many more. Like, that was a really amazing day, but we have a whole lifetime of best days ever, right?
Yes.
And I think similar in a career where you are not going to work the same job forever. That seems crazy, right? If I told you, okay, you have to pick a job and you're going to do that job for 30 years, that seems impossible, because you've never done, you know, if you're in your 20s, you've never done anything for 30 years. So why do we have that expectation that our career is going to be fixed when that's just totally not the case? And it hopefully is a little bit exciting that you can always make changes.
Right. And then even when you sit in the same profession for 30 years, like, shout out to the sterile processing OGs.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But even when you sit in that job for 30 years, you can't tell me you were doing the same exact thing.
Absolutely.
Because listen, you know you're the best at answering the phone now and going into decon. So listen, if we put you back there, I'm sorry, we're gonna do it. But you know, on top of that, the level of your expertise and your professional ambition, and it just grows and grows. And even if you have that 9 to 5 mindset, which is a totally acceptable mindset if you're actively engaged at work, and you can have professional ambition and still be in a 9 to 5 mindset. And I think
what is ambition? What does ambition even mean, right? Like, let's say you're someone watching this who has been a tech for 25 years.
Yes.
I would bet a lot that what you were doing 25 years ago is very different than what you're doing in that role. Like, just in terms of physical instruments that you're dealing with, the machinery you're dealing with, the types of indicators that are available, the standards that are in place, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So over that time, your position has probably dramatically evolved, even if you kept the title the whole time. So yeah, there's nobody who is doing the same job day one and year 20 day one. It's just an impossibility. Our world changes too much.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, you know, and just, you know, before we head out, I just want to leave with some actionable takeaways. If you guys need to watch this again, Knowledge and Nonsense is going to have this on replay. And yes, it will count how many times you watch it, but we won't tell anybody, because there's some awesome knowledge and no nonsense in this CS Stories. And I'm so excited. So some actionable challenge steps: write down your professional vision. If you need help garnishing objective-driven goals, ask the who, what, when, where, why of your profession. And then if you've had a flop, maybe that's the key indicator of where you need to go next. Jaime, thank you so much for hanging out with me today on CS Stories. I am so excited that Proper Manufacturing Company lended me your time and you gave it to all of our awesome nuts and bolts CSS nerds out there.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure. Best of luck to anyone who's questioning their journey, and don't be afraid to ask for help if you're just not sure.
Awesome, guys. And don't forget, you can put the CSS in your success. We'll see you guys in a couple of weeks when we have Marjorie Walls on to discuss her biggest flop and how she turned it into the silver lining for her golden success. Bye. All right.